When people think of their first experience with Mega Man, they probably think of the mainline series or Mega Man X, 2D side-scrolling platformers where you run right, jump, and shoot a lot. That wasn't the case for me. My first encounter with the franchise was a 3D third-person action RPG. I can't remember why I picked Mega Man Legends 2 out from the store shelf. I would have been 11 at the time, but I do know its anime presentation, Zelda-like dungeons, and overall gameplay mechanics kept me coming back for more. I wonder if, almost 20 years later and having finally played the first Legends game, my incredibly high opinions of this title will have changed. Before we go into this one, I have massive nostalgia for this game. It was a big childhood favourite of mine, and my love for it is the reason that I sought out the original for as long as I did, and why I eventually paid the price I did to get hold of that first game. So there may be some fanboying involved. I'm gonna try my best to stay objective, but just be warned, okay? The game opens with Professor Barrel and his old friend Von Blucher preparing for an expedition to Forbidden Island. They believe the Mother Lode will be there. You know, that legendary treasure the first game hyped up and then completely forgot about? It's also revealed that Roll's parents ventured to Forbidden Island 10 years ago, but never returned. Suddenly, Von Blucher's ship is attacked by a woman resembling Roll's mum. It goes down over Forbidden Island, prompting Mega Man and Roll to launch a rescue mission. You'd be forgiven for assuming Forbidden Island is the final objective of the game, especially as it's continually built up as somewhere no diggers other than a younger Barrel and Blucher have ever come back from. In truth, you go there within the first hour and it's incredibly underwhelming, only serving to start a scavenger hunt across the world for 4 keys to unlock the Mother Lode. The bulk of the game then covers that world-hopping adventure. Thankfully, the world's much easier to explore this time around. While the first game's system of tank controls on the D-pad with L1 and R1 for turning is still an option, you can now use the left analog stick for movement and the right for camera control and turning. This gives us a third-person game with what feels like a modern first-person shooter's control scheme. This changes the game entirely, making it immediately feel more responsive, fluid, and intuitive to play, giving you more maneuverability and options. Likewise, the lock-on system has been greatly improved. You're no longer rooted in place during lock-ons, making it far more viable to actually use. Not being able to dodge or change positions made me discard the lock-on system in the original title, but in the sequel, I used it constantly. The one downside to this system is the sheer number of times it locked onto the wrong enemy, even if I was already pointing the camera in the general direction of the foe I wanted to take down. To counter the vastly improved player controls, enemies seem more aggressive, have more health, sometimes to the point of being bullet sponges, appear in greater numbers, are more varied, and can now inflict status effects such as an electric paralysis that decreases your movement speed and jump height, or flames that cause constant damage. These status effects can be really frustrating to deal with. In my opinion, they're inflicted too easily, last too long, and the effects are too severe. Worse still, if you're against a group of enemies that can cause an effect, it's entirely possible to have it chained. There were times I got into a bind and just reloaded my last save because it either didn't seem possible to get out of the situation, or it already cost me too much health. This became really apparent in the fire dungeon, where enemies could knock you onto lava tiles. There's also the ice dungeon's boss battle, where you had to awkwardly jump to a platform before the floor caused you to burst into blue flames. The jumping controls were a constant pain, as they're just too imprecise, and having to suddenly use them in a pinch moment like this, with such a large punishment for failure, was simply irritating. You can buy upgrades and body parts for Mega Man that negate these status effects entirely, albeit they're some of the most expensive items in the game. If you're playing naturally, you won't be able to afford upgrades to negate burning and fire damage until after you've already completed Sulcata, the Fire Temple. Mega Man's a robot, so he doesn't level up like a traditional action RPG character. The parts you buy are the only way to increase his maximum health, damage output, and defenses. You've got some control over the game's difficulty because you can choose to never buy an upgrade for the equivalent of a level 1 run, or you can buy stuff that makes Megaman a walking death machine. There's an issue in how the game distributes money though. Without grinding, you'll likely spend the first half of the game woefully underpowered, and the second half insanely overpowered. Cash is given out in drips and drabs early on, while later game dungeons have chests that hand out between 40 and 150k at a time, allowing you to grab stuff that would have been really handy about 3 hours ago. Bosses also vary wildly in difficulty. The good news is, each boss now has several stages, so their attack patterns vary as the fight progresses. They also have gimmicks, such as this frog making me jump across platforms and consider my positioning, or these petal things only being vulnerable while they're attacking unless you have the homing launcher. The bad news is some bosses will absolutely drain your health, while others can be beaten without taking a single hit. This was incredibly apparent while fighting them back to back during the boss rush at the end of the game. In particular, I found this blob boss really hard to read because it doesn't have limbs. Its wind-up animations and tells were less obvious, and it preferred to get up close and personal instead of fighting at a distance. The final boss was also a sheer cliff wall in terms of a difficulty spike. The first form was annoying but manageable. It kept teleporting, breaking my lock-on, and some of the attacks were tricky to avoid and counter, but you could get there. The second form, however, that was a relentless barrage that drained my health in seconds. I'm ashamed to admit that in the end, I just stocked up on healing items and bulldozed my way through it with sheer brute force. I kind of robbed myself, as the victory didn't feel at all satisfying. Besides picking and choosing your upgrades, you can also control the difficulty level through digger licenses. You start the game as a Class B digger. This gives you access to all of the story dungeons and some of the optional ones. To get into the rest of the side areas, you need to complete a practical exam and upgrade your license. Completing an exam will also automatically make every enemy in the game stronger and more aggressive though, with the trade-off being they'll drop more money when killed. The exams give you set body parts and equipment, meaning you can complete them as soon as you reach the first town. However, it also means grinding for more health or firepower is pointless, as your upgrades are taken away from you for the duration of the test. It's even footing, entirely skill-based, and incredibly hard. Due to the strict time limits, I found the best approach was to simply be as aggressive as possible, take risks, and shoot first. Despite the amount of ways the player can customize the difficulty level, I never found a sweet spot. I was either frustrated at being kicked around, or complacent while nothing could really touch me. I'd also argue that setting the difficulty curve and balancing the game is the job of the game designers, not the player. I praised the first Megaman Legends for having a sense of community. I got attached to the singular setting and the characters that lived on Catalox Island. Megaman Legends 2 greatly increases the scope by offering a world map with multiple towns to explore. It deserves praise for how unique each town is. There's very clear theming here, making them instantly recognisable even if they fall into the tropes of snowy town, desert town, etc. Where other RPGs would repeatedly use the same shop interiors and NPCs, Legends 2 gives each store a unique floor plan and shop owner. What's disappointing is that the shops have a shared inventory. There aren't unique items to each store, so it doesn't really matter where you go and spend your cash. This leads me nicely to a larger problem. While each town is smaller, more compact, and therefore more convenient to navigate, they also lack incentive for repeat visits. While on this globe-trotting adventure, I couldn't help but notice I turned up in a place, completed the story quests there, and then never really had any major reason to return. It felt very off to the next town, and I never bonded with any of the locations like I did in the original. These themes also apply to the dungeons, which, at first glance, look more complicated and as if they have lots of branching paths and optional areas, but in reality have one linear and very guided route, with only one or two offshoots thanks to lots of locked doors, minor backtracking, and some hand-holding from Roll's dialogue. Whenever you see 3 doors, chances are only one of them is unlocked, or only one of them leads to a corridor, while the other two contain single rooms filled with loot. It's unlikely you'll be able to completely clean out a dungeon on the first try. For example, several of them have walls that can only be broken with a drill arm side weapon. The drill arm's useless in combat, you'll only have it if you check this one very specific and inconspicuous crate for one of the parts to make it, and you can only have one side weapon equipped at any one time. The dungeons each have gimmicks. We talked about how the fire dungeon has lava, but the ice dungeon will make you slide around unless you have cleated shoes, the final dungeon has changing gravity, and the water dungeon has a really frustrating theme of submerging rooms so you can lift heavy objects and jump higher at the cost of your own movement speed. These were very hit and miss, and I was aware going back in would mean dealing with these mechanics again. I took the overpowered homing launcher with me to every dungeon's first run, and with the water temple's annoying gimmick, I actively didn't want to go back with the drill arm for anything I'd missed. Wherever you are, your surroundings and characters will look great. If you've seen my reviews of the previous games, you'll have heard me gush at length about the graphics, but this anime art style, where all of the shading is in the texture maps with very few lighting effects, has made these games age beautifully. They're a testament to working smartly within the hardware constraints to create a stylized and timeless presentation. A minor nitpick is some cutscene animations seem stiff. They lack fluidity and expressiveness. With this aesthetic, you've got room to really exaggerate and go over the top, but these scenes sometimes feel like someone playing with a toy, awkwardly moving one limb at a time. It's certainly a downgrade from what we were given before. Another thing that bugged me is the game suffers from the PlayStation's infamous dithering. In a game like Metal Gear Solid, it can really add to the gritty vibe and atmosphere, but in a game like Megaman Legends 2, which has a cute and clean style, it actively clashes with the overall look and feel. I did appreciate the new effects. The snowstorm on Forbidden Island, the heat waves on Sulcata, and the underwater effects all add to a sense of place. It's one of those nice little touches. They didn't have to do it, but now I can't imagine these areas without them. There were also some nice optimizations here and there that were obvious playing in 1080p over HDMI on a PlayStation 3, but weren't so easy to spot 19 years ago playing on the original PlayStation over composite on a CRT, such as these crowd members just being flat 2D textures. Frustratingly, the audio balancing issues that were present in Mega Man Legends 1 and The Misadventures of Tron Bonne still crop up in a few scenes, with some characters sounding like they're mumbling.
We are from the past, your ancestors. We are in a world we never made. We mean no harm. We simply desire to live out the rest of our lives as best we can.
This is the third game in the series now. How have they not fixed this? It's a shame because the voice acting across the franchise has otherwise been quite good for the time they came out. Fortunately, the music is still on point with strong melodies that I was humming long after turning the game off. That said, I don't think any of the new tracks were as memorable as the Apple Market theme from the original. Their implementation felt more subtle this time around. They're not as prominent in the overall mix, and definitely take a back seat. A recurring issue with all three games is that the opening is really important, the ending is really important, but all of the stuff in the middle ultimately doesn't matter and could probably be cut entirely. Kingdom Hearts fans no doubt know the feeling. In this case, the Mother Lode key hunt, which makes up a majority of the runtime, may as well be filler. Minor spoilers, I guess, but the keys actually seem to activate the end boss and final dungeon. Yeah, the Mother Lode gets shafted again in favour of another hard turn into stuff about Mega Man's past, exposition on how the planet used to be, and saving the world. It's almost like Mega Man's Ash Ketchum and the Mother Lode is the Pokemon League championship. If he ever gets his hands on it, the series is effectively over. The game then ends on a cliffhanger, and the fanbase have been waiting and campaigning for years for a Mega Man Legends 3. The really short version is that Capcom announced Legends 3 as a 3DS game and promised a demo. Shortly thereafter, Keiji Inafune left the company, and a little while later, Legends 3 was then cancelled altogether. Although that didn't stop Capcom using Legends characters as cameos in pretty much everything in what feels like a constant cruel tease. Not that I'm sour about it or anything. While I share their disappointment, and I do want a Legends 3, I think the hanging plot thread fan campaigns focus on is entirely the wrong one. Spoilers follow, so use the timecode on screen to skip ahead if you need to. The main phrase of most Legends 3 campaigns is to get Megaman off the moon, aka Elysium, where he ends up for the final battle. Megaman gets there in a shuttle that the player can use at will to return to the planet Terra, all the way up until the final boss battle. While the boss's room transforms, there's nothing to say anything's damaged the shuttle, or that Megaman can't get back to it, but from nowhere he claims he's stranded and he'll have to sit tight and wait for Roll to find a way to rescue him. What's even stranger about this is that Data, your monkey companion who accompanied you to Elysium, manages to return to Terra, presumably in the still working shuttle you've been freely using for return trips, to give Roll ancient tech so she can build a rocket to reach the same Elysium which Data just came back from, because they can't just use whatever Data travelled in. It doesn't make any sense.
I got all excited when I heard that what's-his-name, the monkey, came back from outer space and was going to give us ancient technology.
If you're going to have a Legends 3, the plot points that need to be tied up are Roll's missing parents. We meet both, we get confirmation they're Roll's mum and dad, but Roll herself doesn't find out Joe's her father, and her mum's stuck on the moon with Yuna borrowing her body. That, and maybe we could find the Mother Lode we've now spent 2 games hunting, that would be nice. All in all, I still really enjoy Mega Man Legends 2. I think it loses some of the first game's charm, but that's vastly outweighed by the significant gameplay improvements. I can see why this is a beloved cult classic, but there are reasons this never broke into the mainstream. It's a solid B game, and my recommendation would be selective rather than telling everyone to go and play it. If you like 3D Zelda, this is worth looking at. Legends 1 predates Ocarina of Time by a year, and this sequel takes lessons from both to refine the formula. Likewise, if you like anime-styled games, this one's implementation is stunningly gorgeous and not to be missed. Otherwise, if you're just looking for a new, borderline obscure hidden gem to play, you'll likely find a winner here. Hey, Sam here. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, do me a favour and tell a friend about it. I don't know about you, but YouTube's one of those beasts where there's a ton of content, but it's hard to find anything good to watch. I try and make the kind of content I want to see, and if that happens to be the kind of thing you were looking for too, then I think we'll get along.